What's up, everyone? My name is ZayNews, and this is the ZayNews Podcast, where we talk about all things basketball, whether it's the NBA, college sports, youth hoops, you name it. If it's about basketball, then we talk about it here. If you like the content, make sure to like, subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend, leave a comment. Let me know if my takes are trash. Let me know if I'm dead wrong, or let me know if you agree with me and you think I'm right. NBA season is coming up fast. It's already late August. We got FIBA basketball ahead of us in the next week, so there's a lot of things to talk about today. Again, if you like the content, make sure to share with your friends. Let's build a community here. Let's talk about it. Let's just talk about hoops in a safe place where we all can, share our love for the game of basketball. Without further ado, today, what I really wanted to talk about was just doing a deep dive. And I wanted to do a deep dive today into the NBA's Eastern Conference, just all the teams that made the playoffs last year, were in the play-in last year, how I think seeding may change based on what happened last season, what happened during the offseason, and who I think are going to be the big winners going into the playoffs, and who I think may, fall off and not be as good this year. There's some obvious ones in there, as I'm sure you can imagine, but I just wanted to go through each of these like 10 to 12 teams, going through who I think could make big steps forward, and just sharing my opinion on those guys, because there's some teams who made some great moves this year, and I really wanted to touch on all those teams. So just going to go from top to bottom. Going to go from top to bottom in terms of seeding off of last season and touch on each one of these teams. So first and foremost, who I really wanted to talk about, obviously, Cleveland Cavaliers. So the Cleveland Cavaliers were the number one seed in the Eastern Conference last season. They had a really good season up until like the last month. They had they were on pace to win near 70 games. Right, last month they kind of hit a snag where they weren't playing as good. Dudes were injured. Dudes were in and out of the lineup. And, the length of the season, I think, just wore on them, and they fell off a little bit. But they still were in a really good place heading into the playoffs. Won 64 games, had a great season. Now, obviously, we all know what happened in the playoffs. Dudes got injured. They had an underwhelming playoff series versus the Indiana Pacers, and they wound up going home early. Unfortunate, but honestly, the Indiana Pacers were playing at such a high level. I'm not sure that they would have won even if they were fully healthy, right? Like, that's how good Indiana was playing in those playoffs last season. But going into this offseason, they make some moves. They trade for Lonzo Ball, and they're essentially running it back with the addition of Lonzo Ball. I think that's fair to say. So the Cleveland Cavaliers running it back with the addition of Lonzo Ball next season. I think, right, with any team, right, you got to put the health caveat there, but I don't think that's going to be an issue for them. I think they should be the favorites heading into next season. I think we give them that respect based on what we saw last season out of them in the regular season, plus things that have happened, and moves that have been made, and injuries that have happened to obviously decrease the chances of other teams having success. I think Cleveland should be the favorite heading into next season. I really like the addition of Lonzo Ball. I think adding Lonzo Ball, if he can play 65 games, will be huge for them, because he gives them versatility on the defensive end of the floor, but also gives them an addition when it comes to having a backup lead guard who can play with pace, having a guy who can knock down shots and play off of in a starting or in a lineup with Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, and them not lose a beat because of his defensive abilities. Right? I think that's fair to say. He's a very versatile defender. He's a very smart defender. Um, and you pair that alongside Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland in the same lineup, right? Because he's a 6'6" guy, he could switch realistically from 1 to 3, so he can play on any one of those perimeter ball players at any given moment and do the job. So I don't think it's a stretch to say he could be a shooter in lineups with those starting two guards, while also having an impact in that role, as well as being, that lead guard off the bench to really try and, just run an offense for that backup unit. Run an offense, make the right plays, be smart, be a heady player. And one thing about Lonzo Ball that I really like is he's just, all his intangibles, his play style is geared towards playing winning basketball. You know what I'm saying? I think he's highly underrated at that. And obviously it's because, he's been injured for a lot of his career. But he just plays winning basketball. He plays the right way. Whether or not he has 15 points or 5 points, he's affecting the game in so many ways, right? Just being the initiator, advancing the ball up the court, being an outlet passer, um, again, defending, getting into passing lanes, wreaking havoc, right? All the things that he just does well, and he doesn't need shots to have an effect on the game. He's a huge piece. So I think Cleveland realistically should head into the playoffs with the 1 seed again. I think they should be the favorites. I think Evan Mobley will take another step. I think Donovan Mitchell will. I think Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland will both be about where they were at last season. I don't see a big regression out of either of them, unless you tell me like Garland's toe injury is going to linger into this season, which would be unfortunate. But I hope that's not the case. I think those two will give similar levels of production. I think again Evan Mobley will take a step. Let's see Evan Mobley average 20 and 10. I think he was at about 17 and 9 last season. Defensive player of the year, though. Let's see him take a step offensively, average 20 and 10 while still being their defensive anchor. And I like where they're at. I like where the Cleveland Cavaliers are at. I think they should be the favorite. Now, with that being said, I don't know if I would pick them to win if the playoffs started today, but I think they deserve the respect of being the favorite. Absolutely. Boston Celtics. Now, Boston and Indiana, I'm going to do together because I think they're in similar spots, right? Both teams, one coming off a finals appearance, the other one the year before coming off a finals victory. Their best players go down with season-ending injuries for this upcoming season, so neither of them will have their best players. And I think a lot of teams are writing them off, or a lot of people, a lot of fans are writing them off and saying, they won't be around. Both of these teams, one thing that doesn't get considered, right, is both of these teams have very good systems in place. And when you have good systems in place, your system can sustain you for, prolonged periods of time while you don't have your best players. So the reason I bring that up is because yes, Tyrese Halliburton won't be there for the Pacers. Yes, Jason Tatum won't be there for the Boston Celtics. But both these teams still will have an identity going into the 2025-26 season. And that identity, that chemistry, that play style is still going to be tough to beat, especially when you still have a talented roster outside of that. Now, Indiana, I have a little bit less faith in than Boston, and that's still hanging around the playoff rankings because they also let Miles Turner go, which I think was a mistake on their part. But with that said, I think both of these teams, with the pace that they both play at, right, like Indiana's in a get the ball up the court, play fast. TJ McConnell's a guy who can still facilitate that and do that sort of thing. Not to the same extent that Tyrese Halliburton can, obviously, but still can do those things. You still got Pascal, you still got Nesmith, you still got Nembhard, right? Like they still got the guys on Boston's end of it, right? You still got Jaylen Brown, a top 15 player in the NBA. You still got you sign Anthony Simons, a guy who is going to do well in that high volume 3-point setting. You still got Pritchard, you still got White. You know what I'm saying? Yes, you let go of Drew. Yes, you lose Porzingis. They do need a center because they don't have Cornet back. But point being is they did lose some things. And if you're asking me, do I think they're going to be the 2 and 4 seed like they were last year? Absolutely not. But do I think that they both will still be in the play-in area, right, around 42 to 45 wins? I do think that because I think Boston, with the amount of threes they shoot and the way they just play that analytical basketball in the regular season, I do think that will win them games, especially when you're talking about the backcourt that they have, right? They have depth at the backcourt between, it'll probably be White and Anthony starting. Pritchard still coming off the bench, being elite in his role as a sixth man. You still got Jaylen Brown, who is one of the best two-way players in the NBA. And I think as long as he's healthy, 25, 8-4, something like that, right? Like I think that's a season that we could be looking at from him. And if they win enough games, maybe he's on an all NBA team this season. Probably would have to be a playoff team for him to get on all NBA. But I definitely like him at that 25 range. Shooting a high percentage, shooting high volume, being efficient with his scoring, stuff like that. I think we're in for it. So with that said, and I don't want to spend too much time on these two teams, but I think we undervalue how important a system is, and a system is what Boston and Indiana both have in place. They have great coaching, and they also have great systems in place, it's going to be easy to roll in and continue on even without their best players. We've seen it, right? These guys have had time off during their regular seasons, and the teams don't necessarily miss a beat. Now, it's not a whole season that they're missing their best player for, but even with that said, right, like I think just having those systems in place will help them sustain for a long period of time. And you can go back into the history of the NBA and see teams that, have sustained when their best player went down, or when some guys went down because they had a system in place, right? Think the Bulls when Jordan left after his first stint and they go and win 52 games or 56 games the following season in like 94. Think the Denver Nuggets post Melo. Now that was a different roster. They changed a little bit. They changed a lot actually. But if you'll remember, that team had no All Stars, but they made the playoff like every year for like 3 or 4 years straight, with no All Stars, right? And that's because they had a great system, right? So you can sustain good levels of play without an All Star. Now, obviously, there's a cap to that, right? Like there's a ceiling to that. It's not like I would pick either of these teams to be championship contenders. Absolutely not. But playoff contenders, guys who are battling in the play-in, I absolutely think that. But okay, moving on. New York Knicks. New York made some good moves this offseason. I really like what New York did. I think they shored up some holes that they needed to shore up. Now, obviously, their starting five is like pretty solidified. They obviously you got Cat, you got Brunson, you got McCall, you got OG, and then you got Hart. Now, honestly, I think in a perfect world, Hart would be your like the best utility six man in the world, right? Like I think if you could remove Hart from the starting lineup and maybe add a better shooter um, in that lineup, I think that would be huge for them. And then you have Hart off the bench, you have Clarkson off the bench, and you have Yabusele off the bench. I think that would be amazing, right? I think you're really cooking with grease now. And it's not because I don't think Josh Hart is a worthy starter, because I mean, dude averaged like 13 and 10 this year at 6'4". You know what I'm saying? Like, I love the way he plays. Absolutely love the way he plays. I'm just saying more so for the team that they have. Um, you have two elite scorers in Cat, in Brunson. You have a ball dominating guy in Brunson. I think Hart fills a lot of holes, but I think he could be more serviceable off the bench when guys like OG, are on the bench, guys like Cat are on the bench, and you need that additional rebound and you need all that utility that he does. Um, and just to add more shot making onto their, I think like a 3-and-D guy would be beneficial to add into their starting lineup and take him to the bench. And I honestly think like he could average 10 and 10, 8 and 6 off the bench and like be six man of the year contendee, right? Like I think just his impact on the game is insane. But I think that is a change that could potentially be good. But even if not, right? Even if not, they still have Clarkson off the bench now, who is a high level bench guy, as we've seen over the past 5-6 years, is just going to produce off the bench. Yabusele, I think, has found his footing in the league now. Last season with Philly, I think he has some years in him of being like a really good backup big, right? A guy who's versatile, a guy who's like 6'8", 6'9", but just a presence, right? Because he's probably like 270, muscle, strong, can shoot the mid range a little bit, can shoot the three a little bit, but has a little bit of a handle on him for a guy that size. Can get downhill, can finish at the rim, has some skills. I like Yabusele. I really do like him as a backup big, and then Mitchell Robinson as well for the defensive presence. So for the Knicks, I think they should be a top 2 seed. I think their goal should be a top 2 seed, and if they're locked in um, on both ends of the floor, I don't see a reason why they can't be that. But we'll see how the addition of Mike Brown goes, what kind of changes they make. I imagine something that we'll know for sure is that there will be more consistency in their rotation, in the depth of their rotation. Right, he will consistently, especially in the regular season, get 8-9 guys on the court always. Reduce the overall minutes of their best guys. Right, McCall not playing 38 to 40, OG not playing 36 to 38, but rather than playing like 34 having them feeling fresher for a regular season, and all that with good continuity within your team and good chemistry can lead to more wins, right? Because now your guys are fresher. You don't have these lulls in your season where you're struggling because you just have no legs, stuff like that. So, and maybe just going in, they're better, they have better health. So I think their goal should be a top 2 seed, and whew, I think if they're clicking, they may have the most talented roster in the East. Now, you're going to think I'm crazy but just from a talent perspective, you could also argue the 76ers still have the most talented roster in the East. But obviously, we know everything that's going on with the 76ers. So I think out of teams that made the playoffs last season, I think they may have the most talented roster. I don't think that's a stretch to say. Now, will their chemistry um, also improve? Will their, offensive systems also improve? Will all these things that they need to improve, will their defense of consistency improve to a point where they can play consistently enough to be a top 2 seed? I think that's the question for the Knicks, because that ball dominant style is tough. So can we get Jalen Brunson off the ball a little bit more? Can we get him being more of a facilitator? I know he likes to score and he's a great scorer. Oh my goodness, that dude is tough. But can we get him being more of a creator as opposed to a scorer? Not to say that he doesn't create, but can he lean into his creation more, right? Go from 25, 26 a game to like 22 a game. Can Mikal Bridges, can OG become more impactful on the offensive end of the floor? Can we have more opportunity off the bench, right? Can it just be more balanced throughout? Can we have more balance throughout? And if we can, I think the Knicks could end up being the favorite. Even if I don't think they'd be the favorite to win the the um the wins record, right? Like I don't think they'd be the favorite to have the most wins at the end of the regular season. But even if they don't, I think if all things that we just talked about happen, I think they could still be a favorite to head into the playoffs, as most people's consensus, like, yeah, this team should make the finals. I think they could do that because they have a roster, that could do that. But moving on. The Milwaukee Bucks. Man, I'd really like to see, Giannis back in meaningful playoff basketball, like, a top 4 or 5 seed. And I think it could happen this year. I do like some of the additions they made, but there's some guys that are coming, right? Like Orlando, if they don't get, both Franz and Paulo were injured for significant parts of last season. I think both of them missed like 6 weeks, each. Like I think Orlando is a team that could creep up on them and kind of surpass them. But I would love to see Milwaukee and Giannis play meaningful basketball, like be in an Eastern Conference Finals again type basketball. Like that's where I'd love to see them at. They've definitely made some moves, right? And I don't think you can I don't think you could ever how do I want to put this? You can never fault the Milwaukee Bucks front office for trying, right? Because they definitely try. Now, it didn't look the prettiest. We didn't love it when it happened when they waived Damian Lillard off a Achilles injury. But the reality is, I mean, Damian Lillard still gets paid and he gets to go back to a franchise that I think he would rather have been at, right? I think as soon as he left after year one, it was probably like, this isn't for me. I'd rather be in Portland. I don't think he ever truly like wanted to leave or was sold on the idea of leaving Portland, and that's absolutely fair. But with that said, right, Milwaukee, they waive him, they sign Miles Turner, they do some things, they re-sign a lot of guys. I still think they need to go after a guy like Russ. I think if they get a guy like Russ, to be honest with you, I think that's a team that with the way the East is and where they're standing right now, that's a team that I could see being a top 4 seed in the East. And if they are a top 4 seed in the East, I like Giannis as a MVP front runner. I think they could give anybody a run for their money, but I think they just need something. I know they got Cole Anthony. I really like Cole Anthony. I'm not sold on KPJ as your starting point guard, but he does make an impact and he does make shots. There's just I don't know. I gotta. It's tough. It's tough. I mean, on paper, their roster looks decent, right? You got Kyle Kuzma, you got Torian Smith off the bench shooting like 40% from the 3-point line. You got Gary Trent, who's a knockdown shooter. You got all these guys, and I don't think it's the roster looks good, and I think for Giannis, this roster is one of the better rosters they've had, right? Like for what he needs, surrounding him with shooters, um, filling that center role with a younger guy who's more mobile on the defensive end of the floor, who's can stretch the floor better on the offensive end of the floor than Brook Lopez could, and I think just his mobility is going to help them out a lot. So we'll see. I would love to see them in a top 4 seed. Well, I'm just not sold yet. I would love to see like some veteran leadership out of a guy like Russ, and I think him and Giannis pairing would do really well together. Because to me, it seems like their mentality surrounding the game are very similar. The way they attack the game, their approach, their relentlessness is very similar. I think Russ is an a vastly underrated leader and locker room and chemistry guy, and I think that's something that would really instill more faith in me of the Milwaukee Bucks next season. Now, in regards to Russ, I don't know if he wants to leave California. It sounded like the place he wants to play at is like Sacramento, but if he's willing to leave and go somewhere, I think Milwaukee would be the place for him. I think it'd be a great fit, and I think they'd be a team that could maximize Russ prior to him retiring. I don't know how many years he has left. One, maybe two, maybe three. Right? Like athletically, I don't know how much longer he wants to play. But like I could see Russ averaging like 12, 6 and 6 for them. You know what I'm saying? Being dynamic, getting up and down the court, pushing the pace. Like I think he could. Honestly, I would still trust Russ as my lead guard over KPJ. Let me just put it out there. I don't think KPJ is bad, and I think he played decent basketball in the playoffs in that series, even though it was a weird series for Milwaukee. They were just trying to figure stuff out. They didn't have a lot of continuity. I think I would rather have Russ at this point still rather than KPJ as my lead guard. I'm gonna just throw that out there. But best case scenario for them, I think they finish as the top 4 seed. Worst case scenario, they're in the play-in. I think they're in that range. Detroit is a team, man. They made some moves, right? Obviously, the Malik Beasley situation was a weird one, but Detroit, I think, got better, and they got better as a byproduct of health. You know what I'm saying? Give me 1 second. Sorry, guys. I'm just looking up some stats real quick. There we go. But yeah, Detroit. I think Detroit. I think just as a byproduct of health, right? Some of those young guys, they will be better this season. Now, again, I mentioned Malik Beasley. Oh my goodness, and I get losing him, but you signed Duncan Robinson, who's another great glue guy. He's not the shooter off the bounce that Malik Beasley is, but I think he's just as quality of a shooter as Malik Beasley is, coming off pin down, spotting up. I think he's probably better at playing off guys. Maybe not. Malik Beasley had a great season, but I think Duncan Robinson, and you can see this over the course of their careers, is just more consistent. I think he's a more consistent player. His shooting ability is going to warrant gravity, right? It's going to warrant defenses respect them, but also it's going to still allow Cade to grow into being the best or one of the best playmakers in the NBA. You know what I'm saying? And I think for them, you get Cade, you got what's his name coming back? His name escapes me. But he was hurt last season. Got the roster right here. Jaden Ivey. So you got Jaden Ivey coming back. Really good player. You got guys like Durant coming back. Really good player. I really like these guys, and I think they're still maybe a little young. You got a Sir who's going to take another leap. A lot of people talk about him in. A Sir is a guy who can contend for Defensive Players of the Year as well. Like a lot of people, this is a team that I could see taking a step and being a top four seed. Now, not everybody can be a top four seed. You know what I'm saying? So we shall see. But I really like Detroit, and I don't know if they're ready yet, but I think in the upcoming months or in the upcoming seasons, excuse me, there will be a point where they are indeed ready for sure. Okay, moving on to the Atlanta Hawks. Now, Atlanta's a team that I want to spend some time on because them, much like Detroit, I think they have a legitimate shot at being really good. Now, you have one of the best lead guards in the NBA in Trae Young. I think that's undeniable, especially on the offensive end of the floor, what he brings to the table. He's so dynamic on the offensive end of the floor, right? The way he shoots it, the way he can extend defenses, shooting it from deep, and also just the additions they made, right? They're deeper now, right? You add guys like Nikhil Alexander-Walker, you add guys like Luke Kennard who can really shoot the ball. Oneka Okinawe, I know I didn't just say that right, but their center who I think is going to grow. You add Kristaps Porzingis. Can Kristaps give you 60 games? Like, my goodness. Dyson Daniels is still going to be one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA next season. There's a lot to like about this team, and I think one thing that Trae Young has shown is that when he has help, he can galvanize a squad. He can win games, right? Like, no one thought that team from 2021, 2022 should have been in the Eastern Conference Finals. But because the way he, led, him as a distributor, him as a scorer on the offensive end of the floor, they were able to get to the Eastern Conference Finals. And then you add in a guy like Jalen Johnson, who's going to come back healthy. That boy's scary. Can he be 20-10 next season? I really like the Atlanta Hawks. I think Atlanta will be a surefire playoff team, like a top six seed. Obviously, with all the new additions, you have to work out the chemistry and stuff. But I think Atlanta will make some really big strides. Absolutely, will make some really big strides. Another group that people are really excited about, the Orlando Magic. Orlando, I think, is in this is a similar group to all these guys, right? Detroit too. They're still a little young. Both their stars are like 23, 24 years old. So as much as people want to crown these guys like, you know, as a top three seed or one of the favorites going into the Eastern Conference Finals, I don't know if I'm there yet. I think there's some development that still has to happen in Franz and Paulo's games in order for them to be, that. Now, don't get me wrong. It can happen this season, right? Like, you never know when it comes to growth and maturity. Sometimes it just happens fast and something clicks and you're like, oh yeah, now we're winners. And then you talk about the addition of Desmond Bain. You know, it could happen. You get Jalen Suggs back. It could happen. But I would say my favorites right now would be Cleveland, would be the Knicks, and then I think there's going to be like a collection of teams at 2 through 6 that is just like very competitive, right? Like, we talk about how competitive the West is going to be, and I definitely think the West is better than the East from top to bottom. But I think the East is very much so going to be a dogfight, just the same as the West, right? Just to a lesser capacity, I guess. Where teams are really fighting for spots, because I do think teams like Miami, I do think teams like Philly will be back in the fold, and right, that after those top two teams, right? So 3 through 6, 3 through 8 maybe is going to be very competitive, right? It's going to be a dogfight. You're talking about Detroit, Milwaukee, let's Indiana and Boston is going to be at the bottom of this list, right? So even though I do still think they're going to be in the playoff hunt, I think they'll be at the bottom of the list. So they're going to be around like 9, 8, 10, that area. So you got Miami, Orlando, Atlanta, Detroit, Milwaukee. Did I say Indiana? No, scratch Indiana. Milwaukee, Detroit, Orlando, Miami, Atlanta. Those 5 teams are going to be fighting for some viable playoff spots. And dare I say, the 76ers. Okay, the Philadelphia 76ers, that's a team that I wanted to spend a little bit of time on today because after having a very underwhelming but highly dramatic season last season, I think this team is one that could find themselves back in playoff contention next season. Now, that being said, there's still a lot of questions around them, their health, and everything like that. But what I will say is that there are less questions, right? And the reason I say that is because I think Paul George will play this season. I think he will be healthy. He will be on the court at least for, let's say, 60-ish games, right? I think they will have a better understanding of what to expect, how to maneuver through the questions that Joel Embiid's health naturally brings. And also, they have some young talent. They have some new guys on their roster that will really help hold the fort down if Joel isn't playing. So first and foremost, what I would expect out of these guys is Tyrese Maxey to be at a all NBA caliber of production next season. Now, if he is all NBA or not will ultimately come down to them winning games, right? Because these awards are all tied into winning to some capacity. But with that being said, right, like even if Joel's not on the court, you can still realistically have, a solid 7-8 guys that consist of Tyrese Maxey, Jaden McCain, or Jared McCain, excuse me, I said Jaden McCain. Jared McCain, Kelly Oubre, solid wing player. Paul George, I didn't mention Paul George yet. And then you got a guy like VJ Edgecombe, who, even though he is a rookie, I think he's going to produce on this roster, and I think he's going to get minutes. You got Andre Drummond, right, etc. So you have a solid mix of guys, Eric Gordon, who could still produce for you off the bench, that will be good enough in an Eastern Conference that is slightly diminished to at least still be in playoff contention. Now, do I think that they're going to win 50-plus games? I have my doubts. I think that sort of success will depend on Joel Embiid's health and ability to play. Now, the thing is, I don't even think Joel Embiid has to come back and be MVP Joel for them to be successful. I think if you could get Joel to a place where he could play 25 minutes a game and average 20, 20 and 10 in those, or 20 and 8 in those 25 minutes a game, and play 65 games a season, 70 games a season, I think that's a team that can still make some noise, right? Make some noise, be competitive, and it would just ultimately be good to see Joel back on the court because he's just so dynamic and so good when he is playing. And honestly, I don't think it'd be a bad idea for them to manage his minutes more in the regular season, almost like what. Now, Kawhi was a little different, right? Because Kawhi essentially just didn't play the first half of the season, and then he came back the second half of the season and was able to sustain through the playoffs. Ideally, right, it's not that, because I think anytime you do something like that and it's such a large piece of your offense, your chemistry changes. Now, Kawhi just so happens to be a more malleable superstar that can integrate well into these situations, but Joel is more a staple, right? Like he is more, when he's on the court, he is the offense, right? He is the pillar. He is what things are going to be run through. So I wouldn't suggest like just sitting him out until January or February, bringing him in and hopefully being ready for the playoffs. I would say if you can find a way to keep him on the court from, let's say November to March, April, but the entire regular season, but do it in a reduced capacity, I think that could be a winning formula where he plays 65 to 70 games a season, but when he's on the court, he's on the court for 25 minutes a game most nights, and you could even shift his minutes to be more so in the second half and in the fourth quarter. Maybe do like 5-minute increments, and then in the fourth quarter he plays like 8, like something like that. Because then he at least is consistently in the game playing. They're developing chemistry around each other, and by doing that, you allow Tyrese Maxey to take a hold of the offense because he's going to be more of a staple, right? He's going to be a guy who can play 35 minutes a night, be healthy, that sort of thing, and have success. I think if they can do that, if Joel is healthy enough to do something like that, I think that could be a recipe for success for them, and success in the form of better than last year, where they're not even a playoff team. I think that could be something for them, and I'm really interested to see what they do and how they play things. Because last thing I want to see too, right? And Joel Embiid was in a interview like a month ago now, talking about some of the things he struggled with, how hard it's been for him to stay on the court, stuff like that. And you got to empathize with a guy like that who really just wants to play basketball. Starting from where he started from, the player that he's came to be, how much success that he's had, how good he has been in his prime, at his peak, right? Like, you got to feel for a guy who just is having such a hard time staying on the court. But I say all this to say, and the reason I bring it up is like, we want to make sure Joel is, leaving the game in a good place, right? And not super diminished or super wore down, and, has struggled, arthritis, and all this sort of stuff that can happen just by constant high impact if you can't stay on the court, stay healthy, and stuff like that. So Philly is a team that I really want to look at and see what happens with them, because hopefully they could find the right recipe. Hopefully guys can stay on the court. And I think if they do, they will be in playoff contention. Again, I would most likely can see, like, if they do get into the playoffs, or the 7th or 8th seed, maybe a 6th seed. I don't think they'd be a 6th seed, but in that 7-8 range. But even still competing, right? Still competing, still playing at a high level, and still right in the fold of things. So hopefully for them, they can get Joel back to some semblance of health. Um, doesn't have to be, what he was in 23 when he won the MVP, or was it 24 when he won the MVP? But you get my point. But just in a place where he can consistently give you production, give you production, and most importantly, be a part of the offense, be a part of the team. Okay, from there, I've talked about Cleveland, Boston, Knicks, Indiana, Milwaukee, Detroit, Orlando, Atlanta. Now Philly. I haven't talked about Miami. I think Miami has gotten better, though. I think they will now have a full year of Andrew Wiggins, which I think is awesome. I think Norman Powell is a good get. Ideally you could do a roster or a starting five that looks like, Tyler at the 1, Norman, Drew, Bam at the 4 maybe, and then Ware at the 5 potentially, something like that. I don't know if Ware's ready to start. I don't know if they want to take Bam away from that 5 spot. They like playing Bam at the 5. But that's a competent roster. That's a really good roster. I like that roster. You got Jamie Jaquez, who could start as well if you want Bam to stay at the 5. You could start Jamie at that 4 spot. You still got Terry Rozier off the bench, as long as all his stuff is taken care of. You know what I'm saying? You still got Davion Mitchell coming off the bench. You got Jovic, who's continuing to progress and get better. Yeah, I mean, I think this team, for what we know about like Eric Spoelstra, Pat Riley, the Heat organization, the core group that they still have, I think this team will definitely be better than what they were last season. I think the Miami Heat will definitely be better than what they were last season. Now, I don't necessarily have the faith in them to necessarily believe that they will be in the same stratosphere as the Orlandos, as the Detroits, as the Atlantas, for example, with the moves that those teams have made, because those teams have just made more moves to get better, and they got young talent who's like more on the rise, right? Developing more, right? It seems like Bam has kind of hit a plateau. Tyler Hero's kind of hit a plateau. They're not developing in the same way. Whereas you guys got guys like Cade Cunningham, for example, who honestly, in the next 2 years, I wouldn't be surprised if Cade overtakes Giannis as the best player in the East, right? I don't think that'll happen this year, maybe next year, but the year after that, like, I could see Cade becoming the best player in the East. And then you got a guy like Paolo, who, in the same breath, I wouldn't be surprised if him and Cade are like neck and neck in that same stratosphere of players in the East. You know what I'm saying? So that's why I don't necessarily lump them in the same group. But with that being said, they're coached so well typically. And one thing I've noticed about Miami, even in Jimmy Butler's tenure there up to this point, is they have a lot of like great seasons, then okay season, great season, then okay season, right? Even in that span, it wasn't consistent every year. And I think that's because they were never the most talented roster, right? So things had to really click for them. Chemistry had to really click from them. They really had to have a strong identity to make those playoff pushes, those NBA Finals, stuff like that, and make those deep playoffs runs. And I think that we saw that last year as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if this year they rebound a little bit, because it seems like that's kind of been the cycle for Miami over the past 6-7 years, where they have a really strong year where they exceed expectations, and then they come back down to reality the following year. Exceed expectations. And I think this roster is one of the better rosters that they've had since, making a finals, 3 years ago. So I think they'll be better. I would say that they're over 500 next year. They won 37 games last season. I think 42 plus wins is a realistic place for them to be in. Maybe more, right? Because, like I said, Spoelstra is such a good coach, and he has a really good idea of how to maximize the talent of his collective group. The only the things that give me pause is, I feel like Bam should be an all NBA player every year, right? I think he's that caliber of player, but he just doesn't, and he's just not. He's still a high level defensive player. He still gives you a lot of production on offense, but it seems like there's just some sort of barrier there where he can't be your lead guy on the offensive floor, right? He don't get me wrong, they facilitate through him, they do a lot of stuff through him, they use him in a very specific way, which is great. But sometimes you just need a guy who is the guy, go dunk on some dudes. His skill set is insane, right? He can score from the perimeter. He can score from the mid post. He has a mid-range jump shot that's solid. His corner three ball has been improving over the past couple seasons. He has a lot of tools. He's a little like AD though. Just being a primary scorer just doesn't come natural to him all the time. And I think if I really wanted to see Miami be a top 5 seed, a top 4 seed, I would want to see Bam, average 23 and 10, right? 23 and 12, as opposed, and still be a great facilitator, because I think he'd be capable of doing that. If Bam could average 23, 10, and 6, now you're cooking with grease. You know what I'm saying? Now you're cooking with grease. But it's just there's some sort of barrier there in his play style, in his nature as a player, that just prevents him from doing that. So I don't know, but I do think that they should be better. And that just goes back to my point. That I think the East is going to be highly competitive. So let's go down. Let's run off the list. Let's see where we're going to stand at. I would say Cleveland number 1, Knicks number 2. I think that 3 through 7 is going to be Detroit, Orlando, Atlanta, Milwaukee, and I guess Miami there. Say 3 through 6. 3 through 6 will be those groups. So you got Cleveland at the top, Knicks they're right below them, and then 3 through 6 will be something of Detroit, Milwaukee, Orlando, Atlanta. That gives us our top 6 seeds. I think those are the 6 that'll be a lock. And then into that next tier, you got teams like Miami's going to be right there. I think Philly's going to move up and be right there. Teams that I'm not sure of, Chicago. I think Chicago maybe moves out. And then, that's where I'd kind of place the Indiana and the Bostons as well in that play-in range, the 7 through 10 range. So play-in range would be Miami, would be teams like Indiana, like Boston. I think they will still do enough to hang around in there, and then Philly. So that's my top 10. Cleveland, Knicks, Detroit, Milwaukee, Orlando, Atlanta, and then next step in the play-in sphere would be Miami, would be Indiana, would be Boston, and would be Philly. That would be how I would separate things next season if the Eastern Conference playoffs started tomorrow. So let me know what you guys think. I'm excited for the NBA season. As you guys can see, it's actually coming up on us quick. But before the NBA season, we got the FIBA World Cup coming up. We got FIBA basketball coming up this week. We got some great games. Giannis has been playing great in the friendly games that he's played in. Luka's been looking great. Joker always looks great in FIBA basketball, right? France just kicked Greece's butt in a friendly. So, some good looking stuff happening. It's a fun time. You got, the WNBA going on. Angel Reese returned from injury. She's looking fantastic again, right? Like, she hasn't missed a beat coming off that injury. Caitlin Clark's still on the injury sidelines, which is unfortunate. But, at this point, just get healthy, um, and just try and come back when you can. If you got to take the rest of the season off, it's no point in, coming back if you can't be the player that they need you to be. Paige Hoopin, 44 last week. You got the MVP race going on between Nafisa and Asia, which are neck and neck. You look at them statistically; they're very similar. Obviously, Minnesota's the better team than they are out in Vegas, but WNBA is going great. Mario Chalmers, a fellow Alaskan legend, uh, um, just hit a big game winner in the Big Three. So there's a lot of great basketball going around, guys. There's a lot of great basketball going around. You just have to be willing to go seek it out. But the Big Three was a lot of fun. WNBA has been a lot of fun this season. The FIBA basketball is going to be amazing to watch. And then as soon as all this stuff is over, we're talking about preseason basketball. We're talking about training camps, all this sort of stuff, and then we're heading right into the NBA season, which is what we're all here for, right? What we all live for. And then you got college basketball that comes along with that. A lot of fun stuff happening. So again, if you guys like the content, make sure to like, subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend. Leave a comment. Let me know where you think I'm right on this Eastern Conference breakdown. What teams will be successful? What teams may struggle a little bit more than I'm letting on? And let's continue building this community. Let's continue talking basketball, the sport that we love, and try to build this platform out. Wish you guys the best. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. We'll talk soon. Peace.